A racist boss fires his black employee without a second thought. He thought firing Marcus would solve his problem, but when the company begins to collapse, the shocking truth about who was holding it together comes out. The sun poured through the wide windows of Clarkson & Co., its golden rays scattering across neat rows of desks, files stacked in disciplined piles, and computer screens that flickered with the rhythm of another ordinary workday. Outside, the afternoon shimmered with promise, the chatter of pedestrians, the faint hum of traffic, and the laughter of schoolchildren drifting in the distance. Yet inside the office, the brightness seemed to falter, as though the walls themselves absorbed the sunlight and replaced it with something heavier. Colder. The company was small but ambitious, still climbing its way into the competitive market. Every detail of its workspace tried to look impressive: glass partitions polished to a shine, sleek chairs arranged with precision, and motivational posters plastered strategically on the walls. But beneath that glossy surface, the atmosphere carried an invisible weight. People spoke in clipped voices, careful to measure their words. Every laugh was cut short. Every conversation paused the moment a certain figure passed by. That figure was Mr. Clarkson, the owner and boss. He was a man whose presence filled the room long before he said a word. Tall and broad-shouldered, with neatly combed gray hair and a permanent frown etched deep into his face, he carried himself with the air of someone convinced of his own superiority. His voice, sharp and commanding, could slice through the hum of typing keyboards in an instant. Employees feared his criticism, which always arrived like a storm, sudden, loud, and merciless. Yet the person most often caught in that storm was Marcus. Marcus had worked at Clarkson & Co. for 3 years, and in those 3 years he had become the quiet backbone of the office. He was the first to arrive in the mornings, often with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, ready to tackle the day's mountain of tasks. His diligence was unmatched. No file misplaced, no report left unfinished. He carried himself with humility, rarely raising his voice, yet his presence had a way of steadying those around him that his co-workers admired him quietly. They noticed the way he stayed late without complaint, the way he helped new interns learn the ropes, the way he spoke kindly even when under pressure. Some even whispered that Marcus kept the office running more smoothly than the boss himself. But admiration was a dangerous thing in Clarkson & Co., and few dared to express it aloud. Mr. Clarkson, for reasons no one openly questioned, seemed to harbor a particular dislike for Marcus. His criticisms were sharper when aimed at him, his tone colder, his instructions laced with suspicion. "You think you're the smartest one here?" He would sneer if Marcus offered a suggestion. "Just do what you're told." More often than not, Marcus endured it in silence. His dark eyes, calm and steady, betrayed little of the sting he felt. This afternoon was no different. The sunlight through the windows bathed Marcus's desk in warmth, a small sanctuary of order amid the tense office. Papers were aligned with precise care, a pen resting neatly atop his notepad. Marcus's fingers danced across his keyboard with practiced ease, his mind focused on correcting a report riddled with mistakes. He worked with quiet concentration, as though the noise of the office could not touch him, but the tension lingered just beyond his desk. Every employee felt it, the unspoken rule that peace never lasted long in Clarkson & Co. The sound of Mr. Clarkson's shoes echoed against the polished floor, heavy, deliberate. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A junior assistant, clutching a stack of files, froze in place until the boss had passed. Clarkson's gaze swept across the room before landing, as it so often did, on Marcus. His eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. "Marcus," he barked, his voice cutting through the office chatter. "What's taking you so long on that report?" Marcus lifted his head, meeting his boss's glare with a quiet steadiness. "Just ensuring the numbers match across all accounts, sir," he replied, his voice calm, respectful. "Ensuring?" Clarkson scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. "You mean wasting time. That report should have been on my desk an hour ago." The room fell into silence. Co-workers exchanged uneasy glances, but kept their eyes fixed on their screens. Everyone had witnessed this pattern before Clarkson's. Sharp tongue, Marcus's quiet endurance. It was a cruel ritual, as predictable as the ticking of the clock on the wall. Marcus gave a small nod. "I'll have it ready shortly." But as he turned back to his work, a flicker of emotion crossed his face, one that only the closest observer would have caught. It was not anger, nor was it despair. It was something quieter, deeper, the weariness of a man who had long carried burdens too heavy, too unjust, and too often ignored. The sunlight still streamed through the windows, gilding the office in its golden glow. Outside, the world moved freely, untouched by the storm brewing inside Clarkson & Co. Inside, however, the contrast was stark. Light and shadow coexisted uneasily, just as dignity and prejudice did within these walls, and though no one could have guessed it then, this ordinary afternoon so bright beyond the glass, so tense within, was the beginning of a story that would unravel the careful facade of Clarkson & Co., exposing truths that had long remained hidden. The days that followed were heavy with repetition, each one marked by the same unspoken tension. Marcus arrived early, as always, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the office before the others had trickled in. He turned on the lights, brewed the first pot of coffee, and sat at his desk with quiet determination. The building came alive around him. Printers whirred, phones rang, the hum of conversation swelled, but the undercurrent of unease never faded. At the center of that unease was Mr. Clarkson. His sharp voice became a daily chorus, rising above the buzz of work to single Marcus out. It wasn't that Marcus made mistakes. On the contrary, his reports were precise, his presentations thorough, his data accurate. But Clarkson's eyes seemed to seek him out, his words always barbed, as if Marcus's very presence was an affront. "Is this the best you can do?" Clarkson sneered one morning, waving a spreadsheet in front of the entire office. "These numbers look sloppy. Did you even double-check them?" Marcus, seated calmly at his desk, looked up. "I checked them 3 times, sir. If there's an error, I'll correct it immediately." "There's no if, Marcus. There's always an error with you," Clarkson shot back, his tone sharp enough to slice through the quiet. A hush fell over the room. Eyes darted from computer screens to Marcus and back again, but no one spoke. Co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sympathy in their glances, but silence in their throats. They knew Marcus had built the very system that caught mistakes. Before they reached the boss's desk, they knew the figures were flawless. But fear of Clarkson's wrath kept their voices locked inside. Marcus lowered his gaze, his jaw tightening. He did not argue. He did not defend himself further. Instead, he returned to his screen, the glow of the monitor casting light across his steady features. His silence was not submission. It was endurance, born of years of weathering storms like this one. It was not just spreadsheets. Meetings became a battleground as well. Whenever Marcus raised his hand to suggest a solution, Clarkson cut him off mid-sentence. "We don't need your theories. Stick to what you're told." When Marcus delivered a presentation that impressed clients, Clarkson claimed credit, erasing Marcus's contributions with a practiced smile. The office knew the truth, but no one dared to challenge the narrative. The quiet admiration Marcus had earned from his co-workers grew heavier by the day, weighted down by guilt. They watched him work late, watched him shoulder responsibilities others avoided, watched him absorb insults that would have broken another man. Yet when Clarkson's shadow loomed, fear silenced them all. The breaking point arrived on an afternoon, drenched in sunlight, the kind of day that should have been filled with ease. The office buzzed softly with activity, papers shuffling, keyboards clacking, the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. Marcus sat at his desk, finalizing a report for a major client, his brow furrowed in concentration. The door to Clarkson's office slammed open. "Marcus!" Clarkson's voice boomed across the floor. Heads lifted from screens. The rhythm of work stuttered into stillness. He strode forward, a folder clutched in his hand like a weapon. His face was flushed, his eyes hard. Marcus stood slowly, the quiet dignity in his posture contrasting sharply with the storm gathering before him. "Yes, sir?" Clarkson held up the folder, shaking it angrily. "Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" Confusion flickered across Marcus's features. "I don't understand, sir. You never understand." Clarkson snapped, his voice echoing against the glass walls. "You've been causing problems in this office for months. Your so-called efficiency is nothing but chaos disguised as order. Clients are complaining, records are a mess, and I'm tired of cleaning up after you." The words struck the office like a blow. Gasps rippled quietly, though quickly stifled. Everyone knew the truth. Marcus was the one who held the company together. He was the one who fixed others' mistakes before they reached the surface. Yet, here he was, standing accused of the very problems he prevented. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. What defense could he offer that would not be twisted, ridiculed, or ignored? His eyes met Clarkson's for a long moment, steady, unyielding. There was no fear in them, only a quiet resignation. "You're finished here," Clarkson declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Pack your things and leave. I won't tolerate incompetence in my company." The silence that followed was deafening. Employees stared at their screens, at their desks, anywhere but at Marcus. The injustice hung heavy in the air, suffocating, undeniable. Yet still, no one spoke. Marcus's chest rose and fell slowly. He nodded once, the smallest of movements, then began gathering the few belongings scattered across his desk. A mug, a notebook, a framed photograph. His hands moved steadily, no tremor betraying the storm that surely churned within. As he placed the last item into his bag, he paused. The office around him remained frozen, his co-workers still trapped in silence. Marcus lifted his head, his gaze sweeping across the room. His eyes carried no bitterness, no accusation, only a quiet strength, as though he refused to let this moment define him. Without another word, he slung the bag over his shoulder and walked toward the door. Sunlight caught him as he stepped into the hallway, gilding him in gold. His footsteps echoed down the corridor until the sound faded, leaving behind a void that no one dared to fill. Back in the office, Clarkson adjusted his tie with self-satisfaction. But the room felt different now, colder, heavier. Though Marcus had left quietly, his absence thundered louder than any protest could have. And deep within that silence, a seed had been planted, a seed of doubt, of guilt, of unease, that would soon grow into a truth too powerful for Clarkson to ignore. The office felt different after Marcus left. At first, it was the silence that struck them, the absence of his soft footsteps in the morning, the quiet hum of his voice greeting each colleague, the calm presence that had steadied the rhythm of their days. For a brief moment, some even felt relief. The storm that Clarkson had unleashed had passed, and work could resume without tension. But the relief did not last. On the very next morning, a junior assistant frantically searched through the filing cabinet. Papers were scattered across her desk, drawers yanked open and left hanging. "It was here yesterday," she whispered, panic creeping into her tone. "The Thompson file, it's gone." The Thompson file was crucial, a record of months of negotiations with a lucrative client. Clarkson stormed out of his office when he heard the commotion. "What do you mean it's gone? Files don't just walk away." His glare fell on the assistant, who stammered under his fury. I don't know, sir. Marcus always handled these. He kept everything organized. Don't mention his name." Clarkson snapped, cutting her short. "He's gone because he couldn't do his job." If you can't keep track of a single folder, maybe you should go too. The assistant shrank back, her cheeks flushed with shame. The others lowered their eyes, silent as always, yet the unease spread. By midweek, a second issue surfaced. The financial department discovered discrepancies in the quarterly reports columns of numbers that didn't add up. Invoices missing signatures, payments misfiled. Clarkson, red-faced and shouting, accused the accountants of carelessness. But one of them, a soft-spoken man who had worked quietly alongside Marcus for years, muttered under his breath as Clarkson stormed out of the room. This never happened when Marcus was here. He always checked the records before sending them up. His words hung in the air, a quiet truth that no one dared to voice louder. As days turned into weeks, the cracks widened. Clients began to complain first. Small things, then larger ones. A shipment was delayed because an order had been misplaced. A long-term partner threatened to withdraw after repeated mistakes in their contracts. Each time, Clarkson's anger erupted like thunder, scolding whoever happened to be closest. But the employees knew. They had seen Marcus at work, how he patiently combed through contracts line by line, how he spotted errors others missed, how he remembered every client's preferences and quirks. He had been the invisible thread holding the company together. Without him, everything was unraveling. In whispered corners, during hurried coffee breaks, the truth was spoken only in fragments. Do you remember how Marcus used to stay late, fixing things before Clarkson saw them? Yes, he saved my report once. He never even told anyone. It's falling apart now. He was doing more than we realized. They spoke in hushed voices, glancing nervously toward Clarkson's closed office door. None of them dared to say it aloud where it mattered, but the thought echoed in every mind. Things were never like this when Marcus was here. Clarkson, blinded by his own prejudice, remained oblivious. To him, Marcus had been a nuisance, a problem erased. In his mind, the mistakes piling up were the fault of lazy employees, careless interns, and incompetent managers. He barked orders louder, demanded longer hours, and threatened firings with greater frequency. Yet no amount of shouting restored the fragile order Marcus had once maintained in silence. One afternoon, Clarkson slammed his office door so hard the glass trembled. A major client had just called, furious about a miscalculated invoice. The loss could cost the company thousands. Clarkson's face burned crimson as he hurled the papers across his desk. How could this happen? He roared at the accountants he summoned. What kind of fools am I paying to make these mistakes? The accountants exchanged uneasy glances, no one daring to speak. Finally, one of them whispered, barely audible, Marcus always checked. He would have caught this. Clarkson's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? The accountant paled. Nothing, sir. Clarkson dismissed them with a wave of disgust, yet the words lingered in his mind like an echo he could not shake. Marcus would have caught this, but rather than accept the truth, he buried it beneath arrogance. Nonsense, he muttered to himself. He was sloppy. He caused more trouble than he solved. Still, the problems grew. Each missing file, each complaint, each error felt like a shadow trailing Clarkson wherever he turned. And though he refused to admit it, annoying unease had begun to settle in his chest. The employees, meanwhile, carried their guilt quietly. They remembered the way Marcus had walked out, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. They remembered the silence they had chosen, the words they had swallowed. And now, as the company faltered without him, their silence weighed heavier with each passing day. In the evenings, when the office was dim and the desks empty, a strange emptiness lingered. Where Marcus's desk once stood, the sunlight still poured through the windows at sunset, but the golden glow fell on nothing but bare wood and dust. And though Clarkson would not admit it, and the employees dared not speak it aloud, the truth grew clearer with every failure. Marcus had not been the problem. He had been the answer. and the loss of him was a wound that would not stop bleeding. The storm came on a Thursday afternoon, when the office was already fragile from weeks of mounting problems. The phones rang with impatient clients, papers cluttered desks that once were orderly, and the air carried the sour tang of unease. Employees worked with their heads down, dreading the moment when Clarkson's voice would erupt again. Then it happened. The call came in from one of their largest and most prestigious clients. Clarkson took it in his office, the blinds half drawn, his voice booming through the glass for all to hear. "What do you mean the invoices don't match?" Clarkson demanded, his face flushing. He paced behind his desk, gripping the receiver tightly. "Our records are flawless. You must be mistaken." The client's response was loud enough that even those outside his office could hear the fury. Tens of thousands of dollars were unaccounted for, and worse, fraudulent signatures appeared on several key documents. "This is unacceptable," the client barked. "If you can't give me an explanation immediately, we'll cancel the contract and take our business elsewhere. And trust me, Mr. Clarkson, word will spread." The line went dead. Clarkson stood frozen, the silence pressing in from all sides. His pride had always been his armor, but now it cracked under the weight of reality. If the contract was lost, the company would not recover. And for the first time in his career, Clarkson felt something he had not allowed himself to feel before: fear. Driven by desperation, he turned to the very files he had long ignored. He ordered everyone out of his office and locked the door, the blinds drawn tight. For hours he rifled through stacks of folders and boxes left untouched since Marcus's departure. What he found made his hands tremble. The files were immaculate color-coded, labeled, cross-referenced. Each report bore Marcus's careful handwriting in the margins, corrections, notes, and subtle warnings. Clarkson flipped through invoices that had once passed his desk without a second glance. Now he saw a pattern he had never noticed before. Dozens of documents showed irregularities, numbers that didn't add up, payments misdirected, invoices doctored. Yet every irregularity had a second layer, a quiet correction Marcus had inserted. The errors were smoothed out, the losses prevented, the discrepancies buried before they could cause harm. Clarkson's throat tightened. Marcus had been saving the company from disaster, not once or twice, but repeatedly. But it was the signatures that stopped him cold. Again and again, the same name appeared on the original flawed documents: Ethan Clarkson. Clarkson stared at the pages as if the letters themselves mocked him. Ethan, his own nephew. The young man he had hired out of loyalty. The boy he had praised while belittling others. The heir he imagined would one day run the company. Ethan's name was on forged entries, unauthorized withdrawals, doctored contracts. Marcus had been covering up his mistakes, not for praise, not for recognition, but to protect the company, and, by extension, Clarkson himself from collapse. Every late night Marcus spent at his desk, every weary glance his coworkers noticed, had been part of a quiet battle waged in silence. Marcus had borne the weight of another man's corruption, never asking for thanks, never exposing the truth. Clarkson sank into his chair, his hands clutching the damning documents. His chest felt hollow, his breath shallow. Images of the past months flooded his mind, his harsh words, his public humiliations, the day he fired Marcus with a smug smile. He had called him incompetent, disruptive, unworthy. But Marcus had been the most competent of them all. He had been the shield, the unspoken guardian of the company's survival. And Clarkson, blinded by prejudice and arrogance, had thrown him away. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. The door creaked open, and there stood Ethan, his usual smirk plastered across his face. "Uncle," he said casually, hands shoved into his pockets. "I heard about the client. Don't worry. I'll handle it." Clarkson's gaze burned through him, fury boiling beneath the surface. Handle it? He spat, his voice low, trembling. He shoved the stack of incriminating documents onto the desk. "Do you deny this?" Ethan's smirk faltered as his eyes skimmed the pages. His silence was answer enough. Clarkson's fists clenched. All this time he had defended Ethan, shielded him, praised him. And all this time, it was Marcus, the man he had despised, who kept everything from collapsing under Ethan's recklessness. The first time, Clarkson felt the full weight of his mistake. His prejudice had blinded him. His arrogance had made him a fool. And his company, once balanced on Marcus's silent strength, now teetered on the brink of ruin. Outside, the office carried on, unaware of the revelation unfolding behind the closed door. Papers rustled, phones rang, keyboards clicked. But inside, the truth pressed down like a stone. Marcus had never been the problem. He had been the savior. And Clarkson, for all his bluster and pride, had cast him aside without ever seeing him for who he truly was. The sunlight through the blinds striped Clarkson's face in harsh shadows, and for the first time, he lowered. His head, shame, bitter and heavy, settled in his chest. Marcus had asked for nothing, no recognition, no reward. He had simply done what was right. He had protected the company, its employees, and even the nephew who betrayed it. And now, without him, the truth stood naked, undeniable, and merciless. For the rest of that day, Mr. Clarkson remained locked in his office. The damning files lay spread across his desk, their inked signatures glaring back at him like accusations. He could not look at them without seeing Marcus's steady handwriting. In the margins, calm corrections, quiet safeguards, quiet warnings that Clarkson had never once heeded. Every page whispered the same truth. Marcus had been saving the company, while Clarkson had been tearing it apart. The humiliation gnawed at him. He, the proud Mr. Clarkson, who prided himself on being the sharpest mind in the room, had been blind. Worse than blind, he had chosen not to see. He had ignored the evidence, dismissed the murmurs of his staff, and silenced his own doubts. Why? Because the man who had carried the weight of the company happened to be someone Clarkson had decided was unworthy before he ever gave him a chance. The realization was a blade that cut deep. His prejudice had cost him not only Marcus, but the stability of his entire business. Word spread faster than Clarkson could contain it. Clients talked first in cautious whispers, then in bold statements. The financial discrepancies were no longer a secret. Rumors reached other partners, who began to question their contracts. Employees noticed too. They saw the sudden frenzy inside Clarkson's office, the panic in his face as he barked orders, the way Ethan's name no longer appeared with his usual swagger in meetings, and most of all, they began to talk about Marcus. In break rooms, in hushed corners of the office, Marcus's name was spoken with reverence. He was the one who fixed the reports, wasn't he? Yes, all those times I thought I got away with a mistake, it was Marcus correcting it quietly. He never even told anyone. He just did it. Because he cared. The employee's guilt turned into admiration, and admiration into respect. For years, they had seen Marcus's quiet diligence, his late nights, his calm under pressure. They had known, deep down, that his worth far exceeded the way Clarkson treated him. But now the truth stood undeniable. Marcus had not just been a good worker, he had been the one holding them all together. Clients, too, remembered. Some recalled his steady voice on calls, his precise explanations, his reliability when Clarkson blustered through meetings. They began asking where Marcus had gone. Some asked pointedly, wasn't he the one who kept our accounts in order? The question itself was a blade to Clarkson's pride. Inside his office, Clarkson sat with his head in his hands, the weight of shame pressing down on him. He replayed the day he had fired Marcus, the smug satisfaction he had felt, the cruel finality of his words, "You're finished here." The memory now twisted in his gut like poison. He had ridiculed Marcus for incompetence, yet it was Marcus's competence that had shielded them all. He had accused him of causing problems, yet it was Marcus who had prevented disasters. He had dismissed him as worthless, Yet Marcus's worth now echoed in every broken piece of the company. Clarkson's arrogance had blinded him, but it was his prejudice that sealed Marcus's fate. He had never seen beyond the color of his skin, never allowed himself to acknowledge the brilliance standing before him. And now, stripped of his illusions, he could not escape the truth. Marcus had been the savior, and Clarkson the destroyer. When the news finally reached Marcus through whispers, through former colleagues who called him in hushed voices, it was not bitterness that colored his response. He listened quietly, the same calm dignity in his tone. He did not gloat, did not curse Clarkson's name. He simply said, "I only did what I thought was right." That humility spread like wildfire. Soon, everyone from low-level staff to major clients spoke of Marcus not just as a capable worker, but as a man of integrity. His reputation grew beyond the walls of Clarkson & Co., painting him as the figure who had held the company afloat, only to be cast aside unjustly. In the weeks that followed, Clarkson watched helplessly as Marcus became a symbol of everything the company had lost. Employees whispered his name with respect, clients sought him out, and even competitors began to notice. The contrast was stark. While Clarkson scrambled to salvage his reputation, Marcus's dignity only grew. The company that once silenced him now could not stop speaking of him. And Clarkson, left in the wreckage of his own arrogance, finally understood. The cruelest irony of all. He had fired the very man who had saved him. The days that followed were a storm for Mr. Clarkson. His office, once a place of authority, had become a cage of regret. The blinds stayed shut. The once proud voice that filled the hallways was reduced to clipped commands and strained silences. Contracts crumbled, clients demanded explanations, and employees eyed him with quiet disdain. His empire, built on arrogance and prejudice, was collapsing before his very eyes. But amid the ruin, one thought consumed him more than the falling. Numbers or the dwindling respect. Marcus. Every time he shuffled through the wreckage of files, every time he read an email laced with anger from a client, Marcus's face returned to him. The calm patience, the humility, the skill he had so callously dismissed. Clarkson saw, with growing clarity, that the man he had cast aside was the very anchor he needed most. At last, driven by desperation and shame, Clarkson did what his pride had resisted for so long. He called Marcus. The phone rang, each tone a reminder of his arrogance. When Marcus answered, his voice was steady, polite, free of bitterness, yet distant enough to remind Clarkson of the chasm between them. "Marcus," Clarkson began, his throat dry. I made a mistake, a grave mistake. I see it now. You were the backbone of this company. I should never have treated you the way I did. His voice faltered. "I'd like to offer you your position back, with better pay, more recognition, whatever you want." Silence stretched for a moment, but not an uncomfortable one. On the other end, Marcus inhaled slowly, as though weighing every word carefully. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Clarkson," Marcus said finally, his tone firm, "but not unkind. But I've already accepted a position elsewhere." The words landed like a hammer. Clarkson's chest tightened, and he pressed the receiver harder against his ear, as if he could force the answer to change. "Elsewhere?" "Yes, a firm across town reached out after hearing about what happened. They saw value in what I could bring. They treated me with respect before I even signed the papers. I've decided to move forward with them." The simplicity of the response was devastating. Clarkson realized in that instant what he had lost, not just an employee, but a man of rare integrity. A man whose worth could no longer be hidden. Under his prejudice, "Marcus, please," Clarkson whispered, almost begging now. "We need you. I need you." The company will find its way," Marcus interrupted softly. "But Mr. Clarkson, respect isn't something you offer only when it's convenient. It should have been there from the start." There was no anger in his voice, no triumph, no cruelty, only truth. That truth cut deeper than any accusation could. Clarkson could only sit there, staring at the silent phone long after Marcus hung up, realizing he had lost him forever. On Marcus's first day at the new firm, the air felt different. The office was bright, open, filled with warm chatter. People greeted him with genuine smiles, not cautious nods. His new manager shook his hand firmly and said, "We're lucky to have you, Marcus." Lucky, a word Clarkson had never used. Marcus carried himself with the same humility he always had, but there was a quiet pride in his steps now. No longer burdened by the weight of being undervalued, he walked freely, his shoulders squared, his heart unchained. The sun poured in through the tall windows of his new office, golden rays catching the edges of his desk, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt completely seen. He was no longer just a name at the bottom of reports, no longer the man to silently fix mistakes in the shadows. Here, he was recognized, respected, valued. That evening, as he left the building, the sunset bathed the streets in hues of gold and crimson. Marcus walked steadily, the warmth of the light against his back. Each step was a quiet declaration of victory, not the loud kind of triumph, but the deep, enduring kind born of dignity. He had endured humiliation, injustice, and silence. And now he walked into a future where none of that could bind him anymore. He did not look back. Meanwhile, Clarkson sat alone in his office, the walls closing in on him. The sunlight outside was fading, casting long shadows through the blinds he had once kept open with pride. Papers lay scattered across his desk, unanswered complaints, contracts slipping through his fingers, bills piling up, but none of it weighed on him as heavily as the memory of Marcus's final words. "Respect isn't something you offer only when it's convenient." For the first time in his career, Clarkson had no clever retort, no bluster to hide behind. He had built his business on authority and fear, but it had crumbled on arrogance and prejudice. Now, he was left with nothing but the bitter truth. He had destroyed the very foundation of his company by casting aside the man who had been its truest strength. Injustice blinds not only the oppressed but also the oppressor. Prejudice had cost Mr. Clarkson his most valuable asset, while Marcus's dignity carried him to a brighter future. Respect is not a privilege granted at whim, it is a right, and when denied, it can never be reclaimed once lost. And so, while Clarkson sat in the ruins of his arrogance, Marcus walked into the light, free, respected, and finally seen. In the quiet aftermath of everything that had unfolded, the story of Marcus and Mr. Clarkson spread far beyond the walls of the company. Employees whispered it in break rooms, clients murmured it in board meetings, and even rival firms told it. As a warning, the tale became more than just about one man being wrong. It became a lesson about the dangers of arrogance and the blindness of prejudice. For Mr. Clarkson, the weight of that lesson pressed heavily on him each day. He would sit in his once proud office, staring at the empty chair where Marcus used to sit during meetings. How many times had he mocked him in front of others? How many chances had he missed to recognize the quiet brilliance that Marcus carried? Each memory was now a wound, and each wound whispered the same truth. Prejudice had not only blinded him, it had destroyed the trust of everyone around him. The company he had built no longer trusted its leader. Employees no longer sought his guidance, only his signature. Clients no longer believed his words, only his excuses. The foundation he thought was solid had crumbled, not because of Marcus's departure alone, but because of the arrogance that had made that departure inevitable. Prejudice, Clarkson realized too late, was not just an unfair view of another person. It was poison. It seeped into judgment, corroded fairness, and replaced truth with lies. In dismissing Marcus because of the color of his skin, he had dismissed the very heart of what made a company thrive: trust, respect, and integrity. On the other side of town, Marcus's life had taken a different shape. In his new firm, he did not have to prove his worth through silence or endure the sting of public humiliation. Here, His value was clear from the start. Colleagues sought his advice, managers trusted his judgment, and clients quickly noticed his calm reliability. Yet, Marcus never boasted about what he had endured. He did not speak of Clarkson with venom, nor did he try to prove a point to those who had wronged him. His strength lay not in revenge, but in humility. He knew the truth had revealed itself in its own time. It was this humility that drew people to him. When coworkers asked how he managed to stay so calm under pressure, he would smile gently and say, "The work speaks for itself," and indeed, it did. His integrity built bridges where arrogance had burned them. His fairness earned trust where prejudice had destroyed it. Marcus embodied a strength that no title or position could grant, a strength rooted in character. The story rippled outward like stones tossed into water. Younger employees who had once feared speaking up under Clarkson's rule found courage in Marcus's example. They realized that silence in the face of injustice only allowed it to grow. Many whispered, "Things were never this broken when Marcus was here." But more than whispers, they began to demand fairness in their workplaces too. Clients, once swayed by Clarkson's confidence, now looked beyond smooth words and sharp suits. They valued transparency, honesty, and humility because they had seen firsthand what happened when prejudice was allowed to guide decisions. And Clarkson? He became a living reminder of what happens when arrogance blinds a man to the truth. His office remained, but his authority had hollowed out. He watched others surpass him, watched deals fall apart, watched respect slip away. It was not punishment handed down by others. It was the natural consequence of his choices. Prejudice had cost him more than one employee. It had cost him his reputation, his trust, and his future. But for Marcus, the moral was different. He understood now, more than ever, that true strength lies not in loud voices or high positions. It lies in the quiet courage to do what is right, even when no one sees. It lies in the patience to endure injustice without losing dignity. It lies in the unwavering commitment to integrity, even when recognition never comes. He never underestimated people based on where they came from, what they looked like, or what others said about them. Instead, he looked for actions, for character, for truth. And it was this outlook that carried him forward, allowing him to succeed where others faltered. In the end, the story of Marcus was not just about a man wronged by his employer. It was about a truth that echoes across every corner of society. Prejudice blinds us from truth and destroys trust. Mr. Clarkson had all the evidence of Marcus's value before him, yet bias turned his eyes away until it was too late. True strength lies in humility, integrity, and fairness. Marcus never sought glory, never demanded recognition. Yet his quiet honesty became the foundation of trust for all who worked with him. Never underestimate someone based on skin color, for character and actions speak louder than bias. Marcus's work had always spoken louder than words, but prejudice had drowned it out in Clarkson's mind. Only when stripped of everything did Clarkson see the truth. One evening, as Marcus walked home under the fading light, the golden rays of the setting sun warmed his back. He carried no resentment, no desire to look back. His dignity was intact, his future was bright, and his heart was free.